please welcome to the stage President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, Mary Pat Higgins.
Good evening. I hate to break up the party, but please take your seats so we may begin. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And to those of you new to this event, welcome. To those returning, we're so glad to have you with us again. I want to extend a special thank you to our donors, members, and every supporter who walks alongside us to accomplish our mission. Your generosity and dedication make our work possible. Thank you so much for standing with us, for believing in the work we do, and for being a part of our hope for humanity. Together, we are stronger, and together, we can make a difference. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our event chairs, Lisa and Peter Kraus. But before they come up on the stage, I want everyone to be quiet. Shh. Awesome. Thank you. Lisa and Peter, come on.
Good evening, and welcome to this year's Hope for Humanity dinner. I am truly honored to be here tonight and to welcome each of you on behalf of honorary chairs Diane and Hal Brierley and my husband Peter. I would like to express our deep gratitude to Mary Pat, her team, and the board for their exceptional leadership and stewardship of this important museum. I would also like to recognize the wonderful members of our honorary and host committees. Your commitment and dedication, along with your efforts to invite family, friends, and colleagues to be here, have been invaluable in making this evening possible. The museum's mission to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference is as relevant today as ever. Recent events have reminded us of the necessity of this work. So tonight's program is vital in raising the funds needed for the museum's many educational initiatives and programs. Your support allows the museum to reach more students, provide more resources to teachers, and help ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust are never forgotten. Thank you to everyone in this room and to those who were unable to attend for your great generosity and for being true upstanders.
Good evening. Tonight, we are here to honor an extraordinary individual. Ken Burns' commitment to improving society by helping us better understand our history makes him a true hope for humanity. Many of you have seen Ken's 2022 documentary about America's response to the Holocaust. I was struck watching that film. I was struck by the official anti-Semitism that once existed in our government when thousands of Jewish refugees were denied entry into the United States as they tried to escape Nazi persecution. Many of those who were turned away did not survive. This history resonates with me personally. Hitler came to power when my father was just 11 years old, living in Germany, the son of a Catholic father and a Jewish mother. As the war loomed, he and his family could see the rising tide of anti-Semitism and persecution. And like many Jews across Europe, they applied for immigration to the United States. My father applied to and was accepted to Harvard University, and the Nazi government granted him permission to leave for college. But our State Department refused him an educational visa, claiming it was a pretext for escaping the Nazis. Instead of pursuing his dreams in America, my father was arrested, by the Nazis and spent the last 2 years of the war in a prison camp as a forced laborer. My grandmother, too, endured incredible suffering. She survived 3 years in the Theresienstadt ghetto camp. Out of her 13 siblings, she was the only one to survive. Eventually, my father did find his way to the United States, where he built a life, finally was able to attend and graduate from Harvard, served in the American Army as a doctor, and raised my siblings and me in a safe and loving home. His story and Ken's documentary are powerful reminders of the devastating consequences of indifference as America and most of the world largely stood by and watched the horrors unfolding under the Nazi regime. Anti-Semitism did not begin or end with the Holocaust. It is a hatred as old as time, and we fear it may never be eradicated entirely. But we are steadfast in our determination to combat it by educating future generations of its dangers. Thank you all for being here tonight and your commitment to this mission. I would like to extend a personal thank you to my friends, colleagues, and everyone who has supported tonight's event. Your presence means so much to Lisa and me, also to everyone who is involved in this important work. Now please join me in welcoming Rabbi Ari Sunshine to the stage to lead us in this evening's blessing.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Lisa. Good evening. This week's Torah portion, Vayetze, follows the patriarch Jacob's journey through his time in exile from Canaan, during which time he marries both Leah and Rachel, has a family, and serves as a shepherd for the flocks of his oppressive father-in-law Laban. Eventually, after 20 years of service to Laban, Jacob takes his wives and the children and sets out to return home to Canaan, only to be pursued by Laban, who thinks Jacob has absconded with one of Laban's household idols. In his blistering critique of Laban's conduct towards him in this moment and over the years, Jacob points out that while he shepherded Laban's flocks, he endured scorching heat by day and frost by night, and kept himself awake to make sure nothing happened to the animals, and covered the costs of any animals that might have been torn up by beasts under his watch. Jacob makes it clear that he went well above and beyond what would have been reasonably expected of him in his role as shepherd. This reminds me of an incident related in the Talmud, where some porters who were day laborers broke a wine barrel of their employer after they had been hired to transport his barrels. He took their cloaks as payment for the lost wine, at which point they appealed to the Talmudic sage Rav for assistance. Rav told their employer to give them back their cloaks. The porters lobbied further and pointed out that they worked all day and they weren't paid on account of this mishap, and thus didn't have money for food to eat for dinner. And Rav then told their employer to pay them their day wages, despite what had happened. When the employer asked Rav if these decisions were according to Jewish law, Rav explained that they were according to Jewish law, because we are taught in the book of Proverbs to walk in the way of good people and keep the paths of the righteous. Said another way, to be good people, we often have to go beyond the letter of the law and look out for those who need protecting. Like Jacob with Laban's flock, and like Rav in his instructions to the frustrated employer, we often find ourselves in moments or experiences where we have a distinct choice to make. We can keep our heads down, focus on ourselves, and do the bare minimum for others. Or we can lift up our eyes, take note of those who need our strength, our support, and our protection in the face of injustice or oppression, and choose to raise our voices and reach out our hands and help those in need. Tonight and every day, may each of us be reminded what it means to be an upstander and how much of a difference we can make in others' lives if, in the words of Proverbs, we walk in the way of good people and keep the paths of the righteous. The choice is in our hands to make. Amen. Now we recite the Hamotzi so we can begin our meal together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth. Amen. B'tei avon, we eat with a hearty appetite.
Please welcome to the stage President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, Mary Pat Higgins.
Good evening again. I hope you're enjoying your dinner and the wonderful company at your tables. Tonight, we're here to honor someone who shares the museum's commitment to ensuring that the past, through our stories, lives on. Through his remarkable films, Ken Burns has provided classrooms and viewers a compelling way to explore history. Thank you so much, Ken, for your enduring dedication. Let's clap for you. We're very grateful for your enduring dedication to education and for helping shape generations of learners who are engaged, informed, and inspired. I also want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Diane and Hal Brierley and Lisa and Peter Kraus. Truly the dream team. Along with our honorary and host committees, they have all poured so much effort into making tonight this wonderful success. We simply could not have done this without them. Thank you. And I'm profoundly, profoundly grateful for all of our generous donors. Your support enables us to continue our vital work. Our work began 40 years ago in 1984 when a determined group of Holocaust survivors came together with a dream to create a center in Dallas that would educate the community about the horrors of the Holocaust and serve as a place of remembrance for those who were murdered. Many of you may remember visiting the original space at the Jewish Community Center as students, seeing our historic boxcar, the first of its kind to be placed in a museum. Those early days laid the foundation for what we have become. In 2005, we moved to a small space in Dallas's historic West End, continuing to welcome students, teachers, and visitors who were eager to learn. And in 2019, with an expanded mission to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights, we opened the doors of our beautiful new museum, our permanent home. In the 5 years since the museum has welcomed students and field trips presenting meaningful special exhibitions, we've engaged the community with thought-provoking public programs, and we've provided teachers and law enforcement with essential training. We've reached visitors from North Texas and from around the world. So many incredible things have happened here in a short time, and we have so much to celebrate. And your support helps ensure our founder's vision continues to have a place where future generations can learn about the dangers of unchecked hatred. 79 years have passed since the Holocaust ended, yet here we are still fighting against the rising tide of anti-Semitism. The worldwide explosion of anti-Semitism since the October 7th attack last year by Hamas reminds us that hatred of Jews is always just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge through conspiracy theories, harassment of Jews, and anti-Zionism. According to the FBI, anti-Semitic hate crimes in our country surged by 63% last year. We continue to be reminded all too often that the past isn't as far behind us as we'd like to believe. Our country faces many types of prejudice and hatred. We are succumbing to the dangerous impulse to focus on what divides us rather than what unites us. We must stand together as a community and a nation to confront prejudice and reject divisiveness based on race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. As you've heard me say before, hatred is learned, and as such, it can be unlearned, and that gives us hope. This year, we will reach 280,000 people through our exhibitions, community programs, and training opportunities. And of these, 190,000 are students. Let's clap for that. We teach these students to be upstanders instead of bystanders, to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. We are thankful that our school partners view us as a trusted resource and look to us for classroom lessons and training for their teachers, librarians, counselors, and administrators. And we would not be here where we are today without our visionary local survivors if they had not started that first museum 40 years ago. Tonight, I hope you will help me express our collective gratitude for the resilience and hope embodied by our Holocaust survivors. Thankfully, several survivors are here tonight, and I invite you all to stand or wave, and let us celebrate you. It is hard to believe that next year will mark the 80th anniversary of liberation. It's a poignant reminder that the survivors still with us were children at the time. Having faced the darkest chapters of human history, they are beacons of strength. They inspire us each and every day to be upstanders, and we are profoundly grateful to those who are with us and to those of blessed memory. Now I invite you all to turn your attention to the screens for a tribute. For respect to all survivors, we ask that you please hold your applause until the end. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage, Chair of the Board of Directors of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, Lee Michaels.
A round of applause for the survivors. Good evening. It is truly heartwarming to see so many of you gathered here tonight as friends, supporters, and champions of our mission at the museum. And a special welcome to our survivors who were able to join us tonight. I would like to add my thanks to Diane and Hal Brierley and Lisa and Peter Kraus. Your leadership, along with the efforts of our honorary and host committee members, has made tonight a memorable evening. I will soon be concluding my term as board chair, and I'm a little bit sad about it. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to my fellow board members. Your unwavering commitment, engagement, and collective wisdom are the backbone of our organization. And none of what we achieve would be possible without our exceptional staff, led by the extraordinary Mary Pat Higgins. Each of you brings dedication and heart to our mission every single day. It has been my honor and privilege to work with you. Our primary goal at the museum is to inspire, educate, and encourage individuals to stand up against injustice, intolerance, and indifference. When we opened our new building, we were focused on bringing as many students as possible to the museum for field trips. And for my Jewish friends in the room, Diane, it would have been enough. But now, thanks to the launch of the Upstander Partnership Program in 2021, we are able to reach students in their classrooms as well. This means, as Mary Pat said, we will impact a total of 190,000 students this year. The Upstander Partnership serves students and school districts across our entire region. Instead of hosting a one-time visit to our museum, we are providing field trips, classroom programs, and a broad curriculum year after year throughout the students' entire education from kindergarten to 12th grade. Through this ongoing education, we are teaching kids to stand up against bullying and hate in all forms, encouraging them to be upstanders. This work has never been more important. Unfortunately, it also costs money. Of the 190,000 students we serve annually, 87% are at a low-income school, which cannot afford to pay for these programs. So tonight, I personally invite all of you to help us inspire more students to become upstanders. I know so many of you have given already and given generously. But please consider making an additional gift tonight to educate just one more student. One student at a time, and we can make a difference. Every donation of any size helps support our mission, and I'm excited to share that an anonymous donor will match tonight's gifts dollar for dollar up to $25,000, ensuring that your donation will go twice as far. You'll find a QR code on the last page of your program, on the tent cards at your table, and on the screens above. Please, please pull out your phones now, scan the code, and make a tax-deductible gift. For those of you who prefer old-fashioned paper, the museum staff will be outside the ballroom at the end of the evening to help you at the registration table. Think of those bright, shiny faces who do not yet know hate, and help us inspire them to be upstanders. Your support is not only appreciated, but essential in helping create a world without hate. I thank you from our future generations. Okay, a quick quiz. What does the Civil War, Prohibition, baseball, and the Holocaust have in common? These are just a few of the subjects of films that have been brought to life by Ken Burns. Tonight, we gather to honor Ken, a pioneer in documentary filmmaking whose work has transformed how we understand history. In the 90s, my family would check out Ken's documentaries at the library, taking 2 shopping bags just to carry home the VHS cassettes. Luckily, today you can stream them right to your TV. Through innovative storytelling and a steadfast commitment to accuracy, Ken has brought the past to life, making it accessible and meaningful for millions of viewers. This became even more apparent to me the last time I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, after recently rewatching his first documentary about the famous bridge. I saw the majesty of the bridge, the East River, and Manhattan from an entirely new perspective. Known for his innovative use of archival footage and still photographers, the Ken Burns effect, his documentaries tackle complex issues and broader social themes. The accurate telling of history is so very important right now, and Ken Burns has made it his life's work to do that. Please join me as we take a retrospective view of his work.
Welcome to the stage. Hope for Humanity honorary chairs, Diane and Hal Brierley.
What an amazing video. It is a pleasure for my husband, Hal, and me to be here with you all tonight. We have been supporters of the museum for many, many years and are honored to be part of this event celebrating our friend Ken Burns. We are grateful to Lisa and Peter Kraus for their leadership as event chairs, and to all of you for your commitment to this year's Hope for Humanity. It is because of supporters like you that the museum can continue to inspire thousands of students, educators, and visitors every year. Thank you for believing in the power of education to challenge hate and foster understanding in our schools, workplaces, and communities. We are especially proud of the impact the museum has on young people, opening their eyes to history and sparking important conversations.
This is the mission shared with tonight's Hope for Humanity honoree, Ken Burns. For decades, his films have been essential, trusted resources in classrooms and beyond. His meticulous research of historical events and his ability to tell an engaging narrative make his work a powerful tool for education. Ken is dedicated to exploring the complexities of history and presenting the story in a way that lets us each think about the issues we've never before considered. This includes this powerful documentary, The U.S. and the Holocaust, that examines how the American government grappled with one of the greatest humanitarian crises in the 20th century. Ken's films are more than just a historical recounting. He helps us reckon with our past, ensuring lessons learned are preserved for future generations. Later in the program, Ken will sit down for a conversation with esteemed journalist Krys Boyd of KERA Think, so we can hear more about his perspectives on how visual storytelling can deepen our understanding of history and humanity. Thank you for joining us to help celebrate Ken's lasting influence. His work not only affects our perceptions of the past, it has the power to shape our collective future. I would now like to welcome back to the stage Board Chair Lee Michaels for the award presentation.
On behalf of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, it is our distinct honor and privilege to present Ken Burns with the 2024 Hope for Humanity Award.
Oh my goodness. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am deeply honored by this recognition, by this award in the midst of one of the worst cataclysms in human history. We have this outrageous, indescribable event, the nadir of civilization, as Guy Stern calls it, that we now refer to as the Holocaust. And yet out of this has come so much learning and so much pursuit of knowledge, so much generosity to each other, that we have an award this evening that is called the Hope for Humanity in the midst of this. And this is what our human project is about, is taking the lemons of history and making something still a little bitter, but also sweet. I accept this award humbly on behalf of my co-directors, Lynn Novick and Sarah Botstein, and our writer, Jeffrey Ward, the scholars that you saw on the screen a second ago, and all of the other scholars who helped us, without whom we could not have made the film as rigorous and as dedicated to telling a complicated and at times uncomfortable story. That kind of collaboration is at the heart of the business I'm in. I'm so very happy to say, and I know by being around you this evening, that kind of collaboration is at the heart of us, trying to get at the mystery of this human endeavor. You know, we have a thing that we refer to today as the State of the Union address. It was defined by the Constitution as a presidential message to Congress. And in 1862, in the middle of Civil War, Lincoln spoke to the Congress in December of '62 and said, "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation." We are now the inheritors. We are that latest generation, and it falls to us to realize how inescapable our history is, how much it shapes our present, how much it will determine, as Hal suggested so eloquently, where we will be and where we will go. And yet we find ourselves, particularly today, I wear the blue square of Robert Kraft's Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism. I hope you know about that. The work is incredibly important. And yet, as Pat and Lee have mentioned this evening, we are beset by increasing examples of anti-Semitism everywhere. We are beset by binary arguments, and that's all we do. And I was speaking earlier to some friends, and I tried to remind them that we have an alternative to just having arguments. The novelist Richard Powers said, "The best arguments in the world won't change a single person's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story." Because good stories are complicated. Good stories tolerate the fact that good people can be both greedy and generous at the same time, virtuous and venal at the same time, that we can hold these complex stories with all their undertow together for an understanding that transcends the mere argument and the winning of that argument. History is central to our survival. Memory gives meaning and perspective and arms us with an ability to go forward with intelligence, but also righteousness. I think the rabbi was absolutely right. You know, we are fond of saying that history repeats itself. It never does. We also like to quote George Santayana, who said, "We are condemned to repeat what we don't remember." It's a lovely phrase, but it's not true. No event has ever happened twice. Mark Twain is supposed to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If he said that, he's absolutely right. But maybe we could go to the Old Testament as we gather tonight and draw from Ecclesiastes that said, "What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again." There's nothing new under the sun. That means that human nature doesn't change, and that human nature superimposes itself over the seemingly random chaos of events, and we see the patterns, we hear the echoes, we see the themes, the motifs, the rhymes of the past, and we are obligated to be students of it. If you do not know where you have been, you can't possibly know where you are, and you will not have a future, either as an individual or as a collective society. We know from the Holocaust what happens when we forget these elemental factors of history. You know, when we have created an other, we have a problem. And I will tell you that I have had the great privilege, and you honor me as no one has honored me before this evening. I have had the great privilege of making films about the US, but I also, in every instant, make films about us. That is to say, the lowercase, two-letter, plural pronoun, all of the intimacy of us and we and our, and all of the majesty and the complexity and the contradiction and indeed the controversy of the US. It is a privileged space to be in, and I have learned over the many years of practicing that there is only us. There is no them. And we have to resolutely, within ourselves and within our families and our communities, reaffirm that there is no them. The othering that automatically takes place among human beings is not the way to go. Lincoln is an interesting person. He seems to have understood and captured our very essence. He had kind of distance in his eyes, the ability to see not only around the horizon, but I think in many ways to see through time. His words resonate to us. And he has a funny sort of way of combining an Old Testament certainty and rigor and sometimes even fury with a kind of peaceful and loving kind of New Testament forgiveness. It's a interesting combination. You know, his second inaugural, in which he's willing to fight for another 500 years with the sword, matching drops of blood with the sword for every drawn by the lash. And then he stops on a dime and he turns and he says, with malice towards none, with charity for all. And so we're constantly being rocked by opportunities to see the world before us, our past and what lies ahead. And so in that very same speech that he gave in 1862, where he says, fellow citizens, we cannot escape history, he also turned on a dime and said, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, we must think anew, we must act anew, we must disenthrall ourselves, and then we can save our country. What he meant by disenthrall ourselves is to not enslave ourselves to the hatred of any group at all. Forgetting is the opposite of all that and comes with a terrible, pernicious cost to humankind. Tonight, we know and we describe one of the worst examples of that cost of forgetting. The expediency, the short-term focus on the transactional rather than the transformational condemns us. So let us always remember and let us never forget. Thank you.
For a conversation with Ken Burns, please welcome to the stage host and managing editor of KERA's Think, Krys Boyd.
Welcome back to Dallas.
Thank you.
I know you've been here many times. We're always happy to have you.
Well, I noticed on the list, and first of all, could I also acknowledge Hal and Diane Brierley, who have been great supporters of my work, but obviously are central to the success of this evening. And also, a dear, dear friend of mine that I've known for a long time is here, and I noticed a past recipient of that, and that's my dear friend Bill Lively, and I just wanted to say it's great to be at the same table with such a deserving honoree, Bill. I'm glad to know you. And also here is Cappy McGarr, who contractually requires me whenever I do public speaking to acknowledge that he's the reason why I did the country music film. Cappy, good to see you.
This event has the wonderful title of Hope for Humanity, which has been a thread throughout all of your work. Are you wired for hope, or do you go looking for it?
It's interesting. I think generally historians find themselves pretty much a hopeful group of people, and I am an amateur historian. I'm mostly a storyteller. I just happen to work in the field of history, which is perfect. It's mostly made up of the word story plus high, which is a good way to start a story. You begin to realize that Ecclesiastes is right, that Mark Twain's right, that there's nothing new under the sun. And so everything is not without some sort of precedent. And some eras are more fraught with anxieties that the precedents are too loud or coming too fast. And so I think you can see, particularly today, a kind of general concern among people of the loss of the polity, this sense of connection to ourselves. Our great gift to the world, the United States, is that we describe ourselves as citizens and not subjects. And there is, in the world today, a kind of momentum that maybe it might just be better for that transactional dimension, for people to be more like subjects and less transformational citizens. That's what our founders, our pursuit of happiness did not in any way have to do with the acquisition of things in a marketplace of objects. It had everything to do with lifelong learning in a marketplace of ideas. Our founders, to a person, would agree that to live a life of education is to make oneself more virtuous, more righteous, perhaps. And in that, you earn the right of citizenship and the participation in the unbelievable, never before in the world, not self-evident, idea that human beings could govern themselves.
Most of your stories are American history. They reflect our collective story back to us. As such, you share moments of triumph, and you never shy away from things that we ought to be ashamed of, or at least reconsider. The U.S. and the Holocaust, of course, is the perfect example of this. For all our efforts to defeat Hitler militarily, we did not live up to our highest values. Have you been able to come to an understanding of how so many Americans overlooked the inconsistency at the time?
It's a tough thing to come to terms with and accept. We've always, and you might have noticed I'm a baseball fan, we call balls and strikes. And I had made a film on the Second World War that came out in 2007, and afterwards lots of people would ask me questions informed by a kind of ignorance about the Holocaust. They had ideas, they had certainties that were not true. And I said to my colleagues, you know, we really ought to think about doing something specifically on the Holocaust. And we set it aside, and then in 2014 we did a film on the Roosevelts. And same thing happened. People came out of the woodwork with certainties about this. And we were sort of fretting and said, you know, we really have to do a standalone thing on what happened in the US leading up to it and what happened in it. And at that time, we were approached by the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., who were about to mount an exhibition, were preparing to, and thought that we could share some scholarship and we could go off and work in our lane and they would work in theirs. And they produced a really wonderful exhibit called Americans and the Holocaust, or Holocaust and Americans. And we worked for a much longer time than we thought. And as I've said many times, I don't think I'll work on a more important film. Here's the sad thing. In 1933, Hitler came to power in January of 1933. In 1933, there were 3,000 mentions of the mistreatment of Jews in U.S. newspapers alone. 3,000. That's 1933. Not much had happened yet. We pretend that we nobly fought this war, reached these concentration camps, and liberated them and found out to our horror what had been going on, and it's not true. We knew we had opportunities to do something, and we did nothing, and in many cases, as Peter was suggesting, we imposed barriers and impediments. We had already had, in reaction to the huge influx of immigrants from 1870 to 1920, essentially unchecked, except for a Chinese exclusionary act, let in everybody. We then closed that door, the golden door that Guy Stern was talking about of Emma Lazarus' poem, and we said no, and we made quotas for those countries with high numbers of Catholics, even tougher quotas for those countries with Jews. And even under those strict circumstances, we could have let in 5 times as many Jews as we did, refugees from the Holocaust, and we did not. And we could have exerted perhaps the will of a country to take in 10 times as many. And then you're making a severe dent in the opacity of the worst number in human history, which is 6 million. It means nothing anymore. Another way to understand it is that in 1933, there are 9 million Jews in Europe. In 1945, when the Second World War ended, 2 out of 3 of those Jews had been murdered. That's another way to say 6 million, and a better way to say it, because you begin to understand that it's not a number that you can just gloss over and not deal with. And so I'm sorry to bring the news. It was really important for us to understand the dimensions of the self-delusion, which, as Mary and Lee suggested, Pat and Lee suggested, is that this is based on anti-Semitism, which is rife in the United States. It has always been there. It has been there in almost all countries. And the second highest circulation newspaper in the country was the Dearborn Independent, which Henry Ford bought and reprinted the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a Russian hoax, misinformation, disinformation about the roles of Jews in the world, and he reprinted it and had the second largest situation. He also thought that Jews were responsible for the assassination of the man I was quoting earlier, and the taste that he felt in the change in the taste of his favorite candy bar, that Jews were somehow responsible for that. This is pervasive in the United States. And so you see poll after poll of people being confronted with evidence, and even when the newsreels came back from the liberation of the concentration camps, not the death camps in Poland, but the concentration camps, Americans do not move the needle on letting in more people than the law permits, which is still an imperceptibly slow thing. This is something we have to own, just as we have to own other aspects, and just as we can proudly own many of the exceptional aspects of our history. And I'm sorry that it comes with a bad message, but it's super important that we not delude ourselves with the fantasy that we woke up in 1945 to what was going on. In fact, we knew, and very soon after the extermination was determined in Germany, we found out about it and we tried to do something. And in fact, to our credit, the United States government let in more people than any other sovereign nation, still not enough. And we started the War Refugee Board. Franklin Roosevelt okayed it out of Treasury to offset the virulent anti-Semitism in our State Department and saved tens of thousands of people, now mostly in Romania and Hungary, not in other places. But we had an opportunity, Anne Frank could be here in this room with us today, living, a grandmother, a writer, a great-grandmother, and she couldn't get in the United States. Her father checked off every box. He was well-to-do, he had connections, he had crossed every T and dotted every I, and he could not get there. And she could be an anonymous person to us today, and she is dead because of the inactivity of the United States government.
You talk about self-delusion. It goes beyond that. Many of us were taught a version of American history that was a little bit like a highlight reel. It was all about the things we were supposed to be excited about and feel good about, and really eliminated discussion of our hypocrisies and our injustices. Do you think this is still happening?
Yeah, of course it does, but let's just be really clear that it's important to acknowledge that all that good stuff happened too. And that what too often is that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're fond of canceling people for crimes of the past. We are happy to excoriate whole groups of people because they did something or looked this way. And none of that's right. You just have to tolerate a true, honest, complicated past that's unafraid of controversy and tragedy, but equally drawn to those stories and moments that suggest an abiding faith in the human spirit, and particularly the unique role this remarkable, but sometimes also dysfunctional republic seems to play in the positive progress of mankind. Those are not inseparable ideas. It is possible for everyone in this room to hold both those ideas at the same time. It is not an either or.
You started making documentaries in college. Your breakout film, Brooklyn Bridge, came out when you were just in your mid-20s. Am I right that David McCullough wasn't sure that he could trust his material to some kid that he'd never heard of?
Well, it wasn't his material, and I didn't treat it as his material. I'd read his book, and it inspired me to do a documentary on it. And I went to him, and I asked him if he would sit for an interview. He sort of pushed me off when I first met him. And then later on, I asked him if he'd be a narrator. He said he couldn't do that, that there was a Hollywood company that was going to make a dramatic miniseries about it that never came to be. And finally kept hearing from people that I had assembled some pretty good shots. He lived on Martha's Vineyard at that time and took the ferry and drove all the way up to New Hampshire, where I live, and came into the bedroom where is a nursery for all of my 4 daughters at one point, and I showed him some footage, and he said, well, at least I'll agree to be an interview. So we went and we interviewed him at his home on the vineyard. He gave a fantastic interview, and then I worked on him, and finally everyone was telling me, you do not hire a writer to be a narrator. And I said, he knows the subject better than anyone else. And I deaf ears, but I convinced him to do it, and he narrated it, and 5 of the first 6 films, 7 films, 6 of the first 7 films that I made, including the Civil War series, he was really good at it and helpful in teaching us about writing, and kind of came along, and we miss him terribly.
Scholars might agree on the who and the what and the where and the when of historic events. The why, though, can still be subject to very differing views, even among people who are quite knowledgeable in their fields. What is your process for deciding what is truth in your films?
Well, you don't decide what's truth, and you don't even decide what the why is. You create a circumstance where you can have the various whys. You're absolutely right. It's all about who, what, when, where, what happened. Gettysburg happened, we know, and I don't know a historian who does not believe this, on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 1863. Any historian who thinks it's otherwise is probably not a historian, and certainly isn't employed anywhere making history. But there are some people who believe that the actions of a certain colonel in a regiment from Maine on the left of the Union line at Little Round Top on the 2nd day, who executed an obscure textbook maneuver, saved the Union Army. Others would say, actually, what's going on around Culp's Hill at the northern parts of the Union line is equally as important. And that's not even the 3rd day, which has something called Pickett's Charge, right? So what you want to do is create circumstances in which you get rigorously all of those other things right. People say, how long do you research and how long do you write? Like, it's 3 weeks research, 3 weeks writing, 3 months research, 3 months writing. We never stop researching. I'm finishing up this thing on the American Revolution. We're locking episodes, and we're still changing things because we're learning new things. We never stop writing. We never stop shooting, so that we wish to be corrigible at the end and create a circumstance where we can allow all those different views to coexist. And it's not so much to set up arguments between people as to permit us to understand that all of life is a Rashomon. You and I are seeing a view of this room that is diametrically, literally, opposed to what everyone else in this room is seeing. And which is true? And the answer is, of course, both of them. So what we try to do is honor the diversity of perspectives, the various modes of inquiry. And if somebody wants to make something emphasis on that, you can try to let it coexist with other things, so long as you're not trying to make an argument, but telling the complexity of a story. Probably people know the great film by Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese director, Rashomon, which is the story of a rape told from 4 or 5 different points of view. It's completely different views, and they're all subjective. And so what we're doing, and people said, are documentaries objective and feature films subjective? You know, it's all subjective. And the only person who knows, and she's not telling.
The novelist Wally Lamb has said every time he sits down to write a new book, he has to learn how to write a book. You relate?
Yeah. It's so funny. I was so convinced after Brooklyn Bridge I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. And I have to, and you have to do that so that, for a couple of reasons. One is each thing is its own thing. It's like a child, right? I have 4 daughters. They are as different from each other as night and day, and they're also clearly from the same family. And so we were talking about this before, there's an enormous dynamic. And yet, you know, with each film, you want to avoid formula. You want to avoid something. It's okay to have a style. Style is the authentic application of techniques. We all have lots of tools in our toolboxes that we can use. And if you go to the Musée d'Orsay in Paris and you stand in a room in the middle and you look at a wall of Cézannes, or 2 walls of Cézannes, you go, I know these are all Cézannes. And then you get up close and each one is its own set of problems and its own set of solutions. But somebody has authentically had that technique, or Monet, or Degas, or Renoir, and I don't know why I've chosen just Impressionists after making a film about Leonardo da Vinci, but such is the way my mind works. Anyway, we see that each one of my films gets recalibrated in different ways. You know, there's no photographs of the revolution, none, and no newsreels. Unless any of you have one, please see me afterwards. So that means we have to sort of rebalance it and recalibrate how we're going to tell that story. And it's exhilarating in the challenge. And that's the important thing. And I think in some ways, your first question about optimism, we sort of do that within the shadow of politics and what's going on, and red and blue and good and bad and dictatorship and you know, when it's really almost about how you digest material and then share it, right? We are all storytellers. Honey, how was your day? Does not begin with, I backed slowly down the driveway, avoiding the garbage can at the curb. Unless, of course, somebody T-bones you, and that's exactly the way you start telling it. What you do is you edit human experience and you say, my boss is an SOB. You will not believe what he said to me today, right? This is how we organize our experience. The joy in its correct organization, however that might be, over many, many years. I mean, I have colleagues who, when they say, how long have you been editing The Revolution? I said, 3 years. And they go, I had to make my last film, make the entire film in less than 2. And we're spending, and this is a great tribute to KERA and public broadcasting, that we're able to do that kind of work, that kind of in-depth work, so that each one of these are not only director's cuts, but they have been fully vetted by critics, by scholars, and it represents the best scholarship that we know to date. That's certainly true of the Vietnam War. I mean, it's now, how many years? That's 7 years old. That film is more than 7 years old, and it still has not been replaced by a book. I'm still so surprised that it's still one-stop shopping for what happened in that war with the aggregation of the latest scholarship from the 23 or 24 scholars that assisted us in doing it, not to mention the veterans, and a belated just acknowledgement of the survivors who are here this evening, which I should have said at the very, very beginning. I'm so honored to be able to spend time with you.
When you gave the commencement address at Brandeis University last spring, one of the things you advised the graduates was to be curious, not cool.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me because it implies that you think of curiosity as not just a desire to know, but a desire to care.
That's right, and to synthesize what you observe into some workable operation. I also said to them that the opposite of faith is not doubt. Doubt is central to faith. The opposite of faith is certainty. Certainty is the death of faith and mystery and all of the things that are attendant to that. And that's not obvious in a country that is so dialectically preoccupied, so interested in the binary. There's nothing binary out in nature. And so we can learn, as Leonardo learned about that. And I wanted to share this idea, this glory of curiosity about what actually takes place. Not what your feed just told you takes place, not what your friends said took place, but what you saw took place. And that, the synthesizing, the collection of that, the accrual of that over time is just a valuable asset for all of us, and helps also set us on a more optimistic relationship to the world that we live in.
Einstein and Freud and Darwin and Dickens and Beethoven and many other great minds have organized their thoughts on long walks. And I know you're a walker. Talk about how those play out for you. Do you go out with an agenda, or do you just let your mind go?
Well, first of all, you don't go out with anything that you want. You just go out kind of open, you know. It's bigger than us, as the little clip from Leonardo, that, you know, we're at best, you know, art is the grandchild of nature. We're sort of in its thrall, and to be able to be present is then to open up. And, you know, I can, along the way, always walk with my dog 3 miles in the morning. By the end of the day, I've got somewhere between 5 and 10 miles, except in Dallas, where when I tried to walk a half a mile, I had 3 friends call me. Are you okay? Be careful crossing the street. No one walks in Dallas. Don't do this, right? I'll drive you back. I said, no, I can walk back, you know? So I've written letters in my head that I've never sent, thankfully. I've written letters that I've sent, thankfully. I've written speeches or ideas of speeches. I've written poems. I've figured out something that was somehow impossible the day before in the editing room. And I go, this is what it is. And you go in and you go, wow, that worked. So there's lots of things that happen in those moments of reflection. And what you're doing is you're submitting to something bigger than yourself. So there was a journalist in the 19-teens who was writing about Alaska and this magnificent, what we then called Mount McKinley, the highest mountain in North American continent, now called Denali, which is, you know, the high one, is the Aboriginal name for it. And he said that looking at the mountain reminded him of his atomic insignificance, which I love that, because in the paradoxical ways of not just nature and our national parks, but so many things before us, that perception of our insignificance actually is inspiriting and makes us larger, just as the egotist in our midst is diminished by his or her self-regard. And so I find that if you have a relationship to nature, or you have a simple and kind of humble relationship to the fact that, you know, none of us are getting out of here alive. There's not going to be an exception made in any one of our cases, and we're going to live forever. And so it comes back to us. What will we do with that time? And in that kind of terror and anxiety, you could understand why people would lie in a fetal position sucking their thumb, right? But we don't. We raise children, we tend gardens, we write symphonies, right? And we live, and we keep, as Wynton Marsalis said, the wolf from the door. The wolf from the door is that intimation of our mortality, and that in that struggle where art is created, where faith flourishes, where human relationships support each other, then we have what's called civilization. The opposite of that is why we have to have this museum.
Ken, thank you so very much for the conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all very much.
And on behalf of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank Ken Burns, thank everyone, and please have a safe trip home, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. That was good.